It's interesting how a pandemic can impact policy. With so much money going out the federal door in CERB payments to Canadians, it seems quite a few people are kicking the tires again on the idea of a guaranteed annual income. Hello and welcome to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand. It's been almost 3 months since the pandemic locked us down to flatten the curve. Thousands thrown out of work due to the restrictions, but they still have to pay the bills. And that's where the idea of a basic income, universal basic income, or guaranteed annual income, whatever you want to call it, where that discussion arises. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has been pushing hard for it. The Liberals, though, they're sticking with their current targeted payments. The idea is polarizing. Some see it as a hand up to improve the lives who are struggling. On the flip side, others see it as a disincentive to work. Today on the Unpublished Cafe, we'll take a look at universal basic income and whether it's too expensive or it'll be offset by the lack of need for social services because people have an income. Coming up on the podcast, we'll talk to Stephen Gordon, economics professor at the University of Laval. As well, Courtney Cable is a PhD student at the Centre for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto. And starting us off, Roderick Benz. He's an author on the issue as well as with the Basic Income Canada Network. And Roderick, targeted basic income, from the BICN perspective, who qualifies?
Well, basic income qualifications is up for grabs, but I mean, no one should be left out. That's the idea of a basic income. There should be some sort of ceiling that is close to a living wage for people, so that no one is left out. That's the whole idea of it.
You know, the guaranteed annual income discussion, basic income, whatever you want to call it, has it's been up and down. We've had this conversation over the last few years, but do you think more people are receptive to it now because of the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I see a great groundswell of support for the idea of a basic income. People are realizing that even before the pandemic, there were three trends that were making life more insecure for people. There was technological change that was so rapid, it was stealing jobs left, right, and center. The fact that so much of our work today, so much of our essential and meaningful work is unpaid, from raising kids to sustaining democracies in our communities, taking care of elderly parents. We haven't done a good job of valuing and supporting that kind of work. And that certainly affects women more than men. And third, public policies all over the map. Some of it has been driven by austerity, adding to job insecurity. At the same time, there have been many programs aimed at poverty reduction, and some help, some harm, and many of them are too complex and inadequate to meet our current needs.
You know, when you look at we'll call it just a basic income right now, but when you look at a basic income, you would get a set amount of money a month. Now, if you started working, does the government starts clawing a bit of that back, does it not?
Yes, it does. That's in the negative income tax model, which is the one that has the most political support in Canada and most countries. Yeah, it does claw some back. Getting that right, getting that sweet spot where you're encouraging people to look for work while at the same time ensuring they don't slip beyond poverty means that's the all-important thing for policy wonks to figure out. And in the recent Ontario basic income pilot, there was a set amount, and then it was taxed. You got to earn 50 cents on 50-cent dollars when you took a job. I think that could probably be tweaked with a little bit more finesse and be more progressive, so that maybe it's 75 cents, then 50, and so on, depending on each circumstance.
Roderick Benz is joining us on the Unpublished Cafe as we talk about a guaranteed annual income or a universal basic income. You know, when we look at something like that, you know, I understand the help up. The people on the other side of the coin are saying, how does this encourage people to work?
Well, people are hardwired to find meaning in their lives, I think. So there could be a blip of not working at first while people maybe get used to the fact that, hey, I'm not going to slip below the, in the cracks, and I'm not going to be forgotten. Then they're going to look for things to do. It's going to eventually improve the job markets as well, because employers will have to start paying a living wage, which is part of the problem that we have right now. So many corporations not meeting that basic living wage standard. So it's going to reshape our whole economy and our thinking.
In terms of the universal basic income, how does this help people get a better education? So they, paves the path for a better career down the line.
Well, people feel more secure about going back to school. Based on our patchwork of loan systems that we have across Canada, I know from analyzing the Ontario data that we did here in Lindsay, where I'm based, one of the 3 pilot sites, there were many people who were choosing to go back to school and choose a post-secondary path that was going to help their families. And then that rug was pulled out, as you know, by the current Conservative government.
Let's talk about the pilot project, and I'm very familiar with the Lindsay area. How was it accepted within the community?
It was tentative at first, and then there was a groundswell of support once people saw what it meant that so many people who had been left behind were not being left behind. We even had more conservative thinkers speaking about the realization how great this was. We had our hospital head, our police chief, all our community leaders on board, our mayor eventually, who was also tentative at first. All these people coming on board in realization that something needed to change because what we have right now is certainly not working.
All right. So the pilot project, it started off tentatively in Lindsay, and then as it grew, you said more people, obviously, was more acceptance. What was the impact on the community and those people when the pilot project was cut loose?
Yeah, it was profound. This is work that my wife has documented as a researcher for York University as well. She's involved in research about basic income for a PhD, whereas I write about it frequently. Lives were transformed. We had people able to choose healthy food for the first time. We had people choosing to go back to school, like I said. We had fewer emergency room visits already in the short time that it was here. Less emergency calls. There was a sense of security that one really can only find in the Scandinavian countries right now, which is certainly a path that I think we need to be emulating.
Was there a lot of outrage in Lindsay, Kawartha Lakes, when the project was canceled?
There certainly was, and we led it as the Lindsay Advocate, our independent media outlet here. We certainly led that charge of outrage, and it was unconscionable, really, what the government did, particularly when it was already well into the program. We lost a lot of valuable data. We mined what we could, and we've shared what we can, but it would have been so much richer had it just been left alone. 150 million, as we're seeing now, is a drop in the bucket, and that's what was needed to complete that pilot.
How much would it cost? What would the price tag be to get a universal basic income up and running here in Canada?
Well, as my friend Evelyn Forget says, she quoted a number of about $40 billion as the Prime Minister's office, the budget office has indicated. But if you start factoring in the dismantling eventually of certain social programs across the country, we could probably get that figure down closer to $20 billion. And again, look at what we're spending now.
Exactly. Roderick, I want to thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Roderick Benz has penned several books on basic income and is a member of the Basic Income Canada Network. The province of Quebec had economists take a look at the feasibility of a guaranteed annual income. Bottom line, it decided that tweaking the current system of benefits would be the best financially. Stephen Gordon's an economics professor at the University of Laval, as well as a columnist, and he joins us now. And Stephen, the report by the 3 economists did not back a guaranteed annual income. Why was that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't. It still wasn't make recommendations. It was more just to set out what the choices are. And I think the best way of doing it, of looking at the basic income, is Kevin Milligan's impossible trilemma. You can have generous payments, you can have modest costs, And you can have a modest clawback rate, which basically means that it works out to a tax rate.
Mhm.
You can only have two of those three. And if you just take the existing budget for income support and divide it, amongst the entire population, you get like a couple of $100 a year. That's the kind of scale it is.
Mhm.
If you want to have something a little bit more generous, you're going to have to increase taxes by a lot. So this is really kind of the issue here. The costs are huge if you want to have it look like what all the advocates want it to look like. And if you don't have those if you don't want huge costs, you're going to have very strong disincentives to work. People are going to be facing tax rates of 75, 80, 90%. Or you're just going to have payments that are just so small that they're just basically useless.
Now, you had mentioned when the Economist took a look at the GAI that expectations were too much.
Oh yeah.
How so?
Well, because people think that everyone's going to get checks for $2,000 a month, and I mean the way people do this is they think they talk about how it would help people in poverty, and that's true, it would. The benefits for cash transfers are well documented. People are very sensible with the money that they get. This is all very true. The problem is always going to be the cost. I'm just looking up here. What they found is that if they want to send $6,000 a year, that would cost $36 billion in Quebec, which is about half of the existing tax burden. So just the numbers are just so huge. Any kind of system where you're going to have half of the payments going to the top half of the income distribution is going to be ridiculously expensive.
I would imagine part of that expense would be the mechanics of it as well. It could turn into a big bureaucracy.
No. That people talk too much about that. No, this is something that the tax system already does. We can tweak these things. People do have direct deposit based on it. And that's actually that's the least of the issue. We already have a bureaucracy set up to deliver checks or to do direct deposit. This would be a very minor cost. That's not it.
Mm-hmm. It's basically the cost of putting out that. Now, the PBO figured providing UBI to about 7.5 million Canadians would cost $43 billion. You calculated at $800 billion.
Well, no, that was just being facetious. And it's basically no. And also that PBO report was about the Ontario system, and the Ontario pilot had issues of its own. It had very serious clawback rates. People would be facing tax rates of about 90%. The biggest winners of the Ontario program would have been adult children living at home, because it's not based on the families; it was based on the individual. So those people would be the biggest winners. There were all kinds of problems with the Ontario thing. It's not really, nobody would really want to use that as a great model. Among other things, for example, the Ontario system. Anybody who had disability payments wouldn't get them anymore. People on disability would have been really badly hit under the Ontario system. So there's just, the Ontario system was expensive and just bad. So people have to rethink that one.
Now, in terms of a GAI or universal basic income. Is there an idea of putting this forward? You mentioned, getting the three things lined up that would be a little bit easier to deal with economically. Is there a way of doing that? Do you see a way of doing that?
No, I really think that looking for big grand gestures is not the way to do it. We want to help the people who are in need, and just work to strengthen, fix holes in the existing system that we have, instead of trying to figure out some way of paying thousands of dollars to people who don't need it. We really want to have some way of getting income revenue, cash to people with low incomes, and do it in such a way that they don't have a huge disincentive against working.
Yeah, the clawback on earnings, I think, is something a lot of people don't take into account.
Yeah.
It's nice that you get that check, but when you start working again, some of that stuff's coming out of you, and then you could be paying more than what you were making in the first place.
Oh yeah, we already have that problem with the existing system, because there are many benefits that are, of course, clawed back as you get more income, and there are people who have with low income who sometimes face tax rates of above 100%, which means that if they actually work an extra 10 hours a week, they actually lose money, and that's a problem. And it's there's no one that's not one for which there's a really a simple solution.
Stephen, I want to thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen Gordon is a columnist and economics professor at the University of Laval. The chorus of voices of support for a guaranteed annual income continues to grow. The federal government is considering more programs to keep Canadians afloat, but is this the only one that's really needed? Courtney Cable is a PhD student at the Centre for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto, and she joins us now. And Courtney, why is a guaranteed annual income a better option than CERB?
So the CERB, first of all, we know that the CERB is ending soon, and so the government's going to have to come up with new solutions to help people support their income as the pandemic goes on. I think a basic income is better than the CERB because it's not conditional on working, right? And so one of the major problems with the CERB is that individuals were not able to quit their job. Mm-hmm. And so they were not provided with the same, particularly low-income individuals, they were not given the ability to say no to work that they think might be unsafe, right? So they had to be laid off by their employers rather than just having the choice to say no. And so there's a lot of discussion currently in designing a new benefit to replace the CERB or extend the CERB. And there's a concern around work disincentives. Mm-hmm. But I think for the same reason, because the pandemic is still ongoing, because people, lower income people with health concerns or that are living with family members with health concerns, a basic income is a better solution because it does not require them or force them to go into work. And so I do think that we should discuss work disincentives about a basic income in normal times. But I think given the pandemic and the health issues surrounding that it's for reasons related to equity that perhaps we shouldn't be concerned about work disincentives.
Where can Canada look to where a guaranteed annual income works?
So no country has actually implemented a full-fledged unconditional basic income that is sufficient to meet basic needs. So for instance, Greece does have a constitutionally guaranteed minimum income, but so a basic income must be sufficient to meet basic needs. The program in Greece is not sufficient to meet basic needs, but it does give us some ideas of how to design a basic income. There have been a number of pilot programs that have tried to measure how a basic income will impact people's lives and how individuals may respond behaviorally to a basic income guarantee. But in my opinion, the pilots don't really give us good insight into whether and how a basic income will work for a few reasons. So they're short term, they have a clear end date. They also exclude middle and higher income individuals who would ultimately end up paying for the basic income through higher taxes. And there might be decision making among married couples in particular in the middle income category who might adjust to a basic income, but we won't see them how they adjust in a pilot because they're not included in the eligibility criteria to be a part of the pilot. So for these reasons, I don't think pilots actually give us a good picture of whether a basic income actually works or how it might work. But all that said, in Canada, we do have two major programs that are essentially conditional basic incomes. So we have old age security, which is distributed to seniors, and we have the Canada Child Benefit, which is distributed to families with children. And so these two programs are basic incomes in the sense that the income is provided, and they do not have to search for work to receive the income. But they're distinct from what we would traditionally consider a basic income, because they are conditional on age, right? So you either have to be a senior or a child.
Right.
And so these two programs are very good templates for a basic income. They've been extremely effective at lifting seniors and families with children out of poverty, right? So right here in Canada, we have two very good examples of where a conditional basic income has worked. But what we're still missing is a major transfer that's targeted at working age individuals without children. And this is the group of individuals that continues to have the highest poverty rates in the country.
The 18 to 64, because you've got the seniors benefit and the child benefit. Exactly. Okay.
Exactly. And so this group in the middle is omitted. There are very small programs intended to help this group, like the Canada Workers Benefit, but it's not enough to put them over the poverty threshold.
Courtney Cable is joining us in the Unpublished Cafe. She's a PhD student at the Centre for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto, as we discuss a guaranteed annual income. And we've heard people talking about, they want to help people out of poverty and who are struggling. And on the other side, you've got people who say, well, I don't want to pay for this because they have no incentive to work. Do we need a culture change here when it comes to gaining acceptance to this type of program?
Yes, I definitely think that that's true. So there's concern. There's kind of like two elements when you think about work disincentive, right? There's real work disincentive. So whether people will actually stop working or reduce the amount of time they spend in the labor market when there is a basic income. And of course, there's perceived work disincentives, which prohibit a basic income even existing, right? And so a lot of people are I think, uncomfortable with the idea that of just giving unconditional income to people, right? There's social norms. There's these social norms that around reciprocity and requiring people to contribute to their communities in receipt of paying higher taxes so that they get a basic income. So I think there are social norms around that. I think there are problems with the assumption that work is a disutility. I think a lot of people, their assumption is that, particularly among lower income people or the jobs that they do, that they don't want to work. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I do think people want to work, and there are people that won't work, but there are people that will continue to work regardless of a basic income is there or not. But changing that assumption that work is a disutility or a curse is very hard to do, and changing the assumption that I don't even know if we necessarily need to change the assumption about reciprocity. But there are ways to design a basic income so that you can address the concerns of voters and taxpayers who are concerned about this notion of reciprocity.
How would you like to see? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, how would you like to see a guaranteed annual income rolled out here in Canada?
So again, it depends on the public sentiment, I think. Ideally, you have maybe a $20,000 basic guarantee so that individuals who are unable to work or have no employment income at all receive this $20,000. And it's no questions asked, right? It would work through the tax system. It could possibly be based on your income from the previous tax year. And there are issues around that. right, in terms of fluctuations in income throughout the year, which the EI system is intended to address, but it doesn't address it for low-income individuals right now. So there is that method. The other method is, if we really think people are concerned about work disincentives, and if no politician is going to touch a basic income or be interested in the idea of a basic income because the voters don't support it, right? Mm-hmm. You can design a basic income so that it incentivizes work and it's conditional on working. So you're kind of getting away from this ideal definition, like ideal notion of what a basic income is, which is it's not related to working or employment at all. But you can design it in a way that, if people work between 9 to 16 hours a week, we give them enough so that with that employment income, they're at the poverty line. And so in that way, you're kind of imposing this element of reciprocity that they have to contribute and work in order to get the basic income. And that work doesn't have to be through formal employment, right? It could be walking the neighbor's dogs. It could be, picking up bottles, right? Like recycling. So I just think I think there's various ways you could design a basic income. There's a lot of decision making that when you think about the concept of a basic income, it's simple, but there are a lot of little details that have to be determined when thinking about designing it. So those are the two main ways. And so I see it as you definitely have to go the negative income tax way versus the universal way, which is clawing it back based on the income of the previous year rather than just giving that $20,000 to all individuals, which would be much too expensive, I think.
Mm-hmm. Courtney, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Courtney Cable's a PhD student at the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto. And that leads to our unpublished .vote question. Do you support the creation of guaranteed annual income in Canada? Yes, no, or unsure? You can log on and vote right now and have your voice heard. I'd like to thank author Roderick Benz for joining us, along with Stephen Gordon, economics professor at the University of Laval, and Courtney Cable from the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources at the University of Toronto. And I want to thank you for listening to the Unpublished Cafe. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.